And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Monday afternoon here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Advance apologies. This will be a meditative, melancholy, hopefully not overly depressing, but real life kind of episode. Today, August 26th, marks 2 years since my father passed. 5 days before he would have turned 80. Now, there's no easy way to absorb the death of a parent, especially a parent for whom you had, my dad and I had our ups and downs. We were very much alike and were constantly butting heads, but we were very close. He was not the easiest person to necessarily get to know. He was very hard to read, great poker player kind of a guy. But we were close. And from the first times when he was in his 60s, kind of approaching the age where he was going to fully retire, and he started talking to me about concepts that, we all know that it exists. We all understand mortality from the time we're at least relatively young, most of us. I kind of got it at a young age, but you push those thoughts aside. At least I did. I shouldn't speak for everybody else, but I didn't want to think about my dad passing. My mom, God bless her, still going strong at 79. These are not things that I preoccupied myself with. Dad had major health crisis when he was in his early 60s. He shattered his hip and he was in traction in a hospital for 7 weeks. You can't help but think about that. But he thought about it more. He wasn't sure if he was ever going to get out of that hospital. And he wasn't worried about himself. He was worried about me. What's going to become of you, Jeremy? You can still hear it. Tears in his eyes. Because from his perspective, I was already 31, but he wasn't ready to go. He wasn't ready to go because there was more that I needed to learn from him. He would never have said it that way, but I think that's what he was putting through the mental meat grinder. And he was always lucid when he had that catastrophic, and he had osteoporosis, my old man. It's not what killed him. But he would have these moments where he would bare his soul. And after that particular major medical disaster of breaking his hip and he discs in his back, his spine got fucked up. It's just really bad. My father and I used to be almost the same height. I was maybe 3/4 of an inch taller than him. He got out of that hospital in Florida. He was maybe 5'7.5", 5'8". The discs in his back eroded. He lost so much height, and part of it was what they call kyphosis. He was a good guy, and as a kid, I felt like he didn't spend enough time with me. So I was not the kind of kid who poo-pooed spending time with his old man. I wanted to spend more time with him, but he was busy. He worked a lot. He was a CPA. And if you have CPAs in your life, you know the money is there to be made, but it doesn't grow on trees. You got to really work for it for huge chunks of one's professional career. You might get to a point, and my dad, to some extent, did reach this point. He still worked too hard, and I thought. But it is possible to reach a point where you can take your foot off the accelerator and still make the big money. It's possible. But usually it is a long, long haul getting to that point, and a lot of lucky breaks, because this is a business, the accounting profession, and you could be a great CPA, but you have to have caught a couple of breaks and gotten really good clients for your own, where you're doing your own billing, and generating your own billing would be more accurate. My father, second generation American, both of his parents were born here, but both of their, individually speaking, parents were the ones who emigrated to the United States. And my father, as much as this is a cliche, he was the first generation of the family to go to college. And he did really well. He was able to start making money fresh out of college. He graduated 2 years early. He was such a whiz bang. Then he got drafted. He caught a lucky break. Vietnam was percolating. But when it escalated, he had less than a year left. And quite frankly, there were so many soldiers, there wasn't any reason to send an accountant. He was working in a finance office, my dad, at Fort Jackson. He never left Fort Jackson. He did basic there, and then he worked in the finance office there. The reality is, whether it's 2024, whether it's 1964, somebody's still got to balance the books. His greatest use to the armed forces was with a pencil in his hand. Cliche though that may be. But I don't want to give you chapter and verse and a blow-by-blow account of my father's life. I miss him. I miss the fact that we lived very close to one another for the last 7 years of his life. I moved into Huntington Village, and I had an apartment in Huntington Village, as many of you know. But if you don't, it's Huntington is like the border of Suffolk and Nassau County, Long Island, New York State. And my father's house was about a mile from there. And I had a lot of ups and downs. I would say from 2016 until August of 2022, I had more downs than ups. In every capacity, I had more downs than ups. But it was good to be so close, literally and figuratively and symbolically, to him, because you can talk on the phone all the time, no matter where you are. Technology is such. You can be anywhere in the world, and there is a platform that will enable you to communicate more or less in real time with a loved one. But being so close, being able to do his food shopping if he didn't feel like going out. Jared, can you get me soy milk? Yeah. The last number of years of Dad's life, we got closer. He trusted me with things that previously he didn't trust anybody with, because somebody was going to have to do it. And these are the concepts that are still difficult. And I was already well into my 40s. I mean, you flash back to the pre-COVID New York of 2019, I was already 45. I wasn't some kid. But he started to tell me things as if he knew that his time was beginning to grow short. And there was genetics for very long life. Grandpa Nat, my dad's dad, made it to 96. And he was still driving and living alone and paying all of his bills on time by check every month, a week before he died. That's how we should all be so fortunate and have the genetics of Grandpa Nat. Now, it is true, Grandpa Nat took good care of himself, never smoked, never drank. He walked every day. But there are just some people that are different than other people. And Grandpa also had a genetic anomaly. He had an extra heart valve. So he started having heart problems in his 60s. He somehow performed his own bypass. And he had bristling good health for almost his entire 96 years. That's the exception, not the rule. He's the outlier. My father, unfortunately, sometime around 2017, when he was 74, 75, this isn't something that necessarily would be apparent, but the light started to dim in his eyes. And this is something that is upsetting to me. Because my dad, for all of the eccentric bits of behavior that he showed for his entire life, and I've got a lot of eccentric bits of behavior. I'm not just talking in a vacuum here about my dad. It's why we butted heads. Well, it's not the only reason, but it was one reason. Because we were wired in such a similar way, even though we had different obsessions, different things that preoccupied us. We had some things that we were the same with the preoccupation. If the Yankees lost a tough game, we would be on the phone, assuming I didn't go over to watch the game, because certainly did that a lot, and we'd be commiserating for a half hour, and he would say something like, Jer, I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight. That is a line that I heard when I was a kid in the mid-'80s. They lost a tough game in 1985. Dave Righetti blowed the game. My sister learned how to say the phrase, Righetti blowed the game. Righetti blew the game. That was a line that I heard for decades. Not going to sleep tonight. Can't believe we lost that game. But somewhere along the light started to dim. And it hurt just to know that he was declining. And it's inevitable for us all. But somebody who had so many things he did that he was great at. He didn't look the part of somebody who would be a master of anything. He looked like, when you imagine a really intelligent Jewish accountant, hardworking, focused, doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, just like his old man. My dad was more or less, not even a stereotype, he'd be the prototype for that sort of, what is your image in your head of a Jewish accountant in his 70s who is now retired? It's going to be someone who looks like my dad. I could find you a number of those guys who are still working. My dad's old partner, God bless, Hal Schulman, the S in SCF & Co. Hal was 5 years older than my dad. He's still working part-time. I don't even know how that's possible. But then again, Clint Eastwood is 94 and he's still working full-time. Do you feel lucky, punk, that he fires 6 shots or only 5? Dirty Harry is a 53-year-old movie now. It's difficult to see your parent decline, even a little bit, because right up until the final health catastrophe, which took hold in October of 2021, I started to get nervous about him because he was slipping. And I didn't think my dad was going to live forever, but I guess I thought that he was going to be more like his dad. Grandpa Nat, other than the fact that his hearing was not great, he didn't lose more than a couple of % off his fastball. In his early 90s, he was still sharp as a tack. He was still able to recall with painstaking accuracy events that took place in the 1920s. I thought that my dad was going to be the same. Dad had great memory also. People think that I'm not wacky or crazy, but that I have this incredible ability to remember names, dates, facts, and figures with regards to sports, with regards to movies. Dad was exactly the same. He used to get angry in the days before Google when he would read an account of a Yankees game in a World Series in 1952, and he would say, that's not how the game went. That wasn't the final score, and the Yankees didn't score in the 7th, they scored in the 8th. I would consult the baseball encyclopedia to check my dad's work. Yeah, he never got any of those wrong. No Google and recall. The same as me. But I'm the guy that points out what Spielberg had for breakfast on the first day of principal photography in Jaws because I learned it on a cold February morning in 1995, and no one ever asked me until yesterday, what did Spielberg eat for breakfast the first day of principal photography? Out it comes. That's what she said. But the synapses in my dad's brain, the synapses in my brain, there is no way to explain why certain things connected. They connected for him, they connect for me. My father was the best Scrabble player I've ever known. From the time he was 11 years old, this is something that I was told not just by him, but multiple people connected to him, mostly family. There weren't any adults who could even give him a game. Now, he was a normal, smart person. My dad was a guy with a high IQ, very clearly. I don't know what his IQ was, but he wasn't Albert Einstein. He was what a normal, smart person who pays attention and works hard could achieve. He was an incredible Scrabble player, but he was even better at putting puzzles together. He was a guy that could take a 1,000-piece puzzle, Nothing but chocolate chip cookies that all look like the same shape and size. And he could put it together in a day. Some people just have the magic when it comes to certain things. When it came to Scrabble, when it came to puzzles, when it came to remembering stuff that the average person didn't even learn in the first place, we just spit out the information like that. But when he started to slip is when he shared things with me that he had never shared before. And he grew in the time that I lived in Huntington. He started to see me, I hate to even put it this way. My dad always saw me as somebody who was very intelligent, but you can't really trust him with certain things. He's not going to get it done. He's not going to do it. He's going to complain and he won't do it. He never would have said it that way, but that's how I believe he thought. So somewhere in the 2019 range, with me already 45, he started to see me differently. And he would see things like, "You're a lot more organized than I thought, Jer." Huh? Yeah. I don't know. I guess I always saw you as a guy that wouldn't be this organized. Oh, okay. I mean, there are people who have offices that are disaster areas, but it doesn't mean that they themselves, in their professional existence, personal life, are disordered. But he started to see me as somebody who had been paying attention and that he could trust. And so he was in a car accident in October of 2021, not long after I returned from a visit to Florida, where he took care of my cats for the last time. It was something that he did. He was never a big cat person. He didn't hate cats, and he wasn't allergic to cats. He, like me, was someone who never grew up around pets, never owned a pet. As I did not own a pet, my parents didn't think that I would take care of, whether a cat or a dog. They were just going to end up taking care of them. And yes, as a younger person, that is exactly how it would have gone. They were not cruel. They let me do pretty much whatever I wanted. The caveat being I didn't really do that much. But Dad was good with the cats because he knew it was important to me. So not long after I returned from Florida, he was in a car accident. And he suffered a head injury. They didn't realize at the time that he suffered a head injury, but clearly he had a concussion. And he had a little bit of bleeding, a little bit of a brain bleed. And he had already been kind of slowly declining, as I said. But this horrendous experience, unfortunately, it was too much. And it didn't seem on the surface that the accident was the sort that would inform the rest of his days, because he was 78 when he had the car accident. And he seemed okay, other than the fact that he was in pain. But in the ensuing weeks, he had a couple of other health crises. And I realized that he wasn't the same as he'd even been a month earlier. We had gone to a Yankees game. I took him to a Yankee game for his 79th birthday. And he started having other medical conditions that I wasn't aware of. He was very quiet. He didn't want to tell me everything that was going on. I didn't ask. But it turned out that there was more going on than just my perception that his eyes weren't as bright as they used to be, that he wasn't as quick as he used to be. Because I can tell you, his checkbook was still perfect. All his house, you couldn't tell when the cleaners had been there or not, because he was very fastidious and meticulous about cleanliness. He always was. That was one of the ironies with he and my mom, which was that Dad was the neat freak. And Mom, and it was hilarious, would sometimes, she was supposed to do the dishes, but she knew if she didn't do the dishes, he would end up doing the dishes, because he couldn't stand to look at dishes in the sink. It was one of his things. Allie, I don't feel like doing the dishes. All right, I'll take care of it. He'd probably be cursing under his breath. But when he went downhill, and I realized that my dad, the person I knew and respected, he was mostly gone. Now, he still could remember, but his short-term memory all but disappeared. And I think because of the head injury, he would start to have almost like gaps. There were gaps. He sometimes repeat himself, and it was really crushing to see. And his mother, my grandmother, she was like a second mom to me. I was closer to her than almost anyone growing up. She hung on for 7 years after she had a pretty significant stroke. And then she had another stroke about a year and a half after that. And it's never good. It's never good when a parent passes, somebody who you love and adore, and just wanted no pain, no suffering. You just want them to, if they have to go, do it in their sleep. No pain. Things don't always go the way that we hope. And my grandmother hung on for 7 years. And to say she was a shell, not exaggerating. There's nothing good about the fact that my father, in a matter of about 9 months, went from still in very good health, even if he had slipped, even if he was only 85 to 90% of what he had been. Still not bad. It's normal. It's attrition. We don't have unlimited amounts of time here. There are things I can't do in the workout arena that I used to be able to. I never thought of that either. Do you think you're going to be able to lift at 50 what you did at 20? Well, more like 25. Well, when I was 25, I wasn't really preoccupied with that. But I can tell you, at least in my case, you can't do the same things. The flesh is willing, but the bone structure is not what it was. You might have the strength to lift something, but you might put yourself in the hospital doing the exact things that barely made a ripple when you were in your 20s. So Dad went from still living on his own, even if I was beginning to get nervous about his ability to continue to drive. It wasn't my place to tell him anything. He was my father. It wasn't that bad, but it was a concern. And then he was in this car accident, and he did not recover. But he had to share with me everything that he had always kept hidden, because he didn't want there to be a situation where he passed and my sister and I were suddenly bombarded with all kinds of financial information and documents. Nothing bad. He didn't have debts. I don't mean it like that. But I had time. I had time to prepare and to kind of acclimatize. Because we bought this house, my father and I, where I am right now here in Coram. This was his idea. And he hoped that he would have another decade. He wanted to live out his golden years here. This was his idea, his dream, if you will. He liked Huntington, but he also liked the idea of selling that house and living with his son, who he was suddenly starting to see as much more on the ball than he ever had, because there were things that I was handling. I did his tax return. I'm not an accountant. He couldn't do it anymore. He said, "Jarek, you think you could get my taxes done?" I said, "Dad, I'm going to do your taxes." The look of shock on his face, it was like a 10% smile and 90%, what the fuck is he talking about? He did his taxes. I guess you can teach an old dog new tricks. No problem. Submitted, accepted, everything was paid that needed to get paid. He got such a kick out of that. Even if he wasn't all himself, he was telling people how proud he was. I didn't even have any idea that Jared could do something like this. They said, "Well, maybe your son's a little bit smarter than you give him credit for." Well, no, I always knew he was smart. I just didn't think he was focused enough. Well, it depends on what we're told when we say focus, right? But the most important lesson that my father gave me, because he was not somebody, he was never a guy to point his finger and lecture you. It wasn't his way. Yeah, sure, he could lose his temper, but that's not the same thing. But he was not a person whose life was made up of bullet points, where this story means this story means that. But something that he believed in the marrow was wisdom that his father, Grandpa Nat, gave to him. And this is something that I carry forward with me, because the reality is that both of those guys were giants. If my father was not as great of a man as his father? Few would be. I mean, Nathan Cohen, he started, never knew his father. His mom died when he was 4. And somehow he became a captain of industry, a business owner, Woodmere Bowling Lanes and Backstage Club. How did he do that? I don't know. He would say he got lucky. He got a couple of breaks, but he had to be brilliant and have incredible people skills. But when my dad, who was behind the 8 ball for years, the divorce, he and my mom, and paying alimony and child support, despite the fact that he was making, by any metric, a phenomenal living, really from his mid-30s forward, once he reached early 30s, once he reached partner level at a big accounting firm, and then was able to form his own firm with these guys, the late, great Mike First and Hal Schulman in the early 80s. Dad was still in his 30s. He's running a mid-size accounting firm. He's basically the CFO. But there are times where no matter what you're making, again, within reason, you're just paying so much out that you can't get ahead. And Dad could not get ahead because of alimony and because of child support. Supporting 2 households, he was getting crushed. So sometime in the mid-90s, he was a little bit older than I am now, he's about 53, he decided he wanted to buy a house. He found a new development in Huntington. He'd been renting in Woodbury at what's now called Eagle Rock, just off near 135, Jericho Turnpike in Syosset, Woodbury. And he told my grandfather, Grandpa Nat, what he wanted to do. And Grandpa Nat gave my dad the down payment. Dad did not have a down payment. He didn't just have a spare couple of $100,000 laying around to just pay cash. Under different circumstances he might have, but he didn't. And Grandpa Nat gave him the down payment. Like that. Because Grandpa had the money. And my dad couldn't understand. He said, Dad, I'm not asking for the down payment. No. My grandfather, who was already 82, going on 83 when this conversation took place, he told my father, he said, Al, it's better to give with a warm heart than a cold hand. And that stuck with my dad. Grandpa Nat was saying, I want to be able to help you while I am here, son. Now, who knew that Grandpa Nat had another 15 years? But he didn't want Dad to just inherit money or property or both. He wanted to help his son because my dad never had to ask for help in his life. This was the first time. And Grandpa was able to help him. So fast forward to 2021 and Dad saying, find a place with an HOA, we'll check it out, and I will live out hopefully many years with you if you are okay with that. Yeah. And he said the same thing with his voice shaking and tearing up because Dad had never been emotional and he became more emotional as he neared the end. Just remember, Jer, it's better to give with a warm heart than a cold hand. I concur. I agree. And I am glad, I'm not glad that my father is gone, but I am glad that my memories of him diminished or fleeting. I remember him at his best, even into his late 70s. He was still able to put together those 500 or 1,000 piece puzzles like that. Still able to knock out a crossword in 3 or 4 minutes. Still able to eviscerate almost anyone at Scrabble. I was good. I could beat him about 1 game out of 3. And he considered that because he knew how good he was. He said, my son is an incredible Scrabble player. He could probably beat me 2 or 3 times out of 10. That was high praise. But my father, Alan Philip Cohen, from the Bronx, graduate of CCNY, Baruch, Army veteran, CPA, business owner, 2 years today since he left this mortal coil. I will always miss him, and I hope someday to live up to the legacy that he set for me and for my sister as well. This has been episode 290 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for this emotional episode, for joining me here on this Monday afternoon in New York. Once again, if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel and haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platform such as Spotify or iTunes or Podbean or Amazon Music, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.